Programming can seem impossible at first, but it's really not. And today I'm gonna prove it by teaching you all the basics of programming. Now, it's important to note that there are many languages out there, each one with a different syntax, but the core principles are still the same. In this case, I will use GDScript, a language used for game development in Godot, and similar to Python, which you probably already heard about. Don't worry though, because even if you're interested in a different engine with a different language, or you're learning another type of development like web development, you will still learn a lot from this. So let's get straight into it with variables. Variables are used to store information. You can think of it as a box that holds something, and this something can be pretty much anything: a number, a string, a boolean, you name it. Now, in programming, you can easily separate languages into two categories, because some will require you to declare the type of a variable when you create it, and others won't. For example, in Java, to create a string, which will store a sequence of characters like hello or game, always between quotation marks, you would declare it like this. And a boolean, which will store a true or false value, would have to be declared like this. On the other hand, in the case of GDScript, our language, declaring the type is not necessary. For example, you could do something like this, or this, or this. And the types would be automatically assigned as an integer in the case of score, or a string in the case of name, or a boolean in the case of player 1. This offers some advantages. For example, you could change the score to 1.5 and it will work, even though it was supposed to be an integer. But it can also lead to errors. For example, you could mistakenly change score to dead, and you wouldn't see any error, but the code obviously wouldn't work when you try to execute this. You may think that that's such a dumb error. How could you change score to dead? But those things happen more often than I would like to admit. So I would still recommend using types whenever you can. For instance, if you know a variable will always be a string, you can specify that like this: var name string equals iden, between quotation marks. Or you can also do this, and it will automatically assign the type. Now, the main types of variables that you will work with in most programming languages are the integer, which stores whole numbers like 1, 42, or -7. The float, which will store numbers with decimals like 3.14 or -0.01. Then we have strings, which, as I already said, will store text like hello or iden. And then we have booleans, which store true or false values. With these variables, you can make operations. For example, you can declare a variable score and then increase it by 5. Or you can multiply it by a bonus stat, set to 1.5 in this case. So you will get 150% of the score as a result. This is really useful for tracking the player health, their speed, and different stats. You can also simplify this part of the code that says score equals score plus 5 by just saying score plus equals 5, which means something like score equals itself plus 5. Then there's more complex variables, for example arrays, which can store multiple values of the same type. So instead of having 3 variables for the different names, you can create an array called names, which will store those 3 variables, and you can access them by writing the location between square brackets. In programming, we start counting from 0. So if you want to check the first name, you will write names, square brackets 0. If you want the second one, you will write names 1. And the last type of variables I'm going to cover today are dictionaries. Let's say that for a character, you want to store their name, their health, and their score. You can create those 3 variables separately, like I explained before. But what if you have 2 characters? Having to track player 1 name and player 2 name all the time would be way too slow and confusing. Instead, you can create a dictionary, which is like an array, but instead of using the position to find things, you can use a key. Think of it as your contact list. You probably don't know all the numbers stored in your phone, and you obviously won't know in which position your friend's phone will be stored. So instead, you search by the name. This is the same. You can create a variable for player, and then between curly brackets, you will add a key, aka a name, and its value. For example, the object player has a key name with the value iden, and then a key health with a value of 100, and a key score with a value of 50. Then you can simply search player square brackets name and you will find the name. This way you can create multiple players, each with their own values for the same keys, and access them with less confusion. And now that you know everything about variables, you need to learn about conditionals and loops. These are some of the most essential parts of programming. as they let you control the flow of your game or application based on certain conditions. Let's start with the if statement, the most common type of conditional. An if statement allows you to execute code only if a certain condition is true. Makes sense, right? So the basic structure will be if condition, do this. For example, we can create a variable score equal 50, and then we say if score is greater or equal than 50, print you won. And since score is indeed equal to 50, we will see you won in the console. And just like the if executes only when a condition is met, there is the else, which will be executed if said condition is not met. So, if video liked is true, print thanks. Else print what are you waiting for? You can also create different conditions using elif, which is an abbreviation for else if. So in an exam, if score is greater or equal than 90, print A+. Elif greater than 80, print A. Elif greater than 70, print B. And last, else, print try harder. The main ways to compare variables are the following. Double equal to check if they are equal. It's important to write 2 and not just 1, as 1 equal sign is used for changing the value, while 2 are used for comparing. Then there's the greater than and less than symbols, which are obviously used to check if something is more or less than something else. And then an exclamation mark followed by an equal sign, meaning not equal. GDScript actually allows using is and is not instead of the double equal and the exclamation mark equal, but this is not the case for most languages. These conditions can also be combined. For example, if you want to check if the age is more than 20 and less than 30, you can write this. It can be written with a double ampersand symbol, or in the case of GDScript, you can just write and. You can also check if something meets one condition or another. For example, if health is less than 0, or time is less than 0, print game over. Now, conditionals are vital, but they are not the only way to control the logic and flow of your game. We also have the for loop and the while loop. The for loop is used to execute parts of the code for a number of times. For example, maybe you have an array of names, and you want to print all of them. In this case, we would say for name in names, print name. The way this works is that we are creating a temporary variable called name. You can call it whatever you want, like player name or just n if you're feeling lazy. Here's what happens step by step. The loop starts and picks the first value from the names array, assigning it to the name variable. It executes the code inside the loop, in this case print name, using that value. Then it moves to the next step in the array and repeats the process, and it keeps going until it reaches the end of the array. So if you had this code, in return you will get Alice, Bob, and Charlie. You can also break the loop if a condition is met. For example, you can check if name equals Bob, then break, and the name Charlie will never be printed. But you don't need to loop through a specific array or object. You can loop through a range of numbers. So if you want to print every number from 0 to 9, you can write for I in range 10, print I. I means iterator, but as we said, you can change that for whatever you want, in case you need something more descriptive. The range function is what creates the numbers for the loop to go through. By default, it starts at 0, and it goes up to, but doesn't include, the number you specify. If you want to customize it, you can add a start number. For example, if you write for I in range 1 to 11, we will print the numbers 1 to 10, rather than 0 to 9. The last modification you can do to the for loop is adding a step, which will specify by how much the number should increase with each iteration. So if we write for I in range 1, 11, 2, we are telling the computer to count from 1 to 10 by 2 at a time, getting in return 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9. Other languages use a different syntax, which is this one. It may seem a bit more confusing, but it means the same. We create the variable I and set it to 0. Then the second parameter works as an if condition. And lastly, we define the increment amount. So I starts at 0, and as long as it's less than 10, it will execute the code inside, and then increase by 1. And the last loop is the while loop. It is like saying, keep doing this while a condition is true. It is perfect for when you don't know exactly how many times you need to repeat something, but you know when it should stop. For example, in my game, the character can move as long as it has energy. But one turn he may have 3 energy, and another turn he may have 5. So rather than using a for loop, what I do is I say, While energy is greater than 0, decrease energy by 1 and move the character. This will first check if energy is more than 0, and if it is, then it will reduce the energy for the next iteration and move the character. Then it will check again, and as long as the condition is met, this will keep executing. That's easy, right? Don't worry because we're almost done. The last thing I will cover are functions. A function is basically a block of code that does something. You give it a name, and then you can call it whenever you want. Think of it as a recipe. Once you have it written down, you don't need to remember every single step. You just follow the recipe. The basic structure is the following. So we are saying create the function with this name, which will do this. As an example, let's say you're making a game, and your character takes damage when hit by an enemy. Instead of writing the same code every time, you could create a function called takeDamage. Inside this function, you will reduce the health by 1, and then print, ouch, I got hurt. Now, whenever the character takes damage, you can just call takeDamage, and it will do all the work for you. Functions can also take arguments, aka inputs. These are the values that you give to a function to work with. For example, in the takeDamage function, we can add the argument amount, and it tells the function how much damage to deal. This way you can hurt the player by any amount. So if an attack deals 3 damage, you would execute this code, meaning the amount is 3, and the health will be decreased by the amount. You can even create functions to break up bigger tasks into smaller pieces. For example, imagine a game where you want to attack an enemy. You may have a function for calculating the damage, a function for reducing the enemy's health, and a function for playing a sound effect. And that's it, these are the basics of programming. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments. I will create a Godot tutorial in the future if you want, so let me know which type of game you would like to learn how to make, as I think we are all tired of platformer tutorials. Oh, and if you want to know which type of game you should make to learn more and make more money, check this video. Or you can check this other one to discover which game engine is the best for you. And that's all for now. See ya!